Greetings. This is Greg Gust with the National Weather Service out of Grand Forks, giving you an update here on the spring flood outlook for the Red River of the North and the Devils Lake Basins. This is the 22nd of March, 2017. And at this time, we start to look at spring's arrival and the last couple of steps now in the thaw process as spring thaw kicks in and as the prospects for spring rains might exist. First off, we still have a substantial risk for spring flooding up in northeast North Dakota and in the Devils Lake Basin, a substantially lowered risk now across much of the rest of the basin, the central and southern parts especially. We'll speak to those conditions that have brought this about in more detail now. In the southern basin, again, the snowpack is largely gone. There was a big thaw in February and extending into March, which pretty much the residual runoff from that is still in some of the river systems, but most of that flow has moved into the red, and a large amount of that water has proceeded up the red and has exited into Canada. Heavy spring snow or rain is still possible through this forecast period. The topsoil is still quite frozen and deeply frozen. It's quite wet. There are some drying on the skin layer in some areas, but it's still quite wet and quite frozen. The outlook period does extend now through the month of June, and the risk of thunderstorms is above normal for this time of the year. In general, the flood risk for much of the central and southern basin is near to actually below normal now for this time of the year. Looking in the northern part of the basin, and especially into the northeast North Dakota tributaries and the Devils Lake Basin, there is still some significant snowpack that remains and snow water content in there. Most of the melt and runoff that has occurred is still parked in the fields and ditches and is still moving into the river system. Additional spring rain or snow is more likely in this area, so again, that factors into the calculations, and very deep soil wetness and frozen ground is still a player here. The outlook, as mentioned before, extends now through the month of June, and the risk of thunderstorms is now above normal throughout this period. In general, for this area, the flood risk is quite high. Looking from early March, we did have much more extensive snowpack in place, and with that, a fairly high snow water content. Just to show here on the 2nd of March, there were trace amounts of moisture available Grand Forks area and south, but we had 1 to 2 inches of water in the snowpack from Cooperstown up through Minto and Drayton and across into the Thief River Falls area, with 3 to 5 inches in the snowpack above that, or north of that. But as we get now into the 22nd, 21st, and 22nd of March, that snowpack has eroded largely south of Grafton and Drayton, with again 1 to 2 inches of water still in the snowpack in the Grafton area itself, and then further north of there 3 to 5 inches of snow across the upper Devils Lake Basin, the upper Park, and certainly the Pembina River basins at this time. That area itself was heavily wetted throughout the preceding summer and fall, with some areas receiving 8 to 14 inches above normal precipitation. So some of that excess moisture is still in the drainage system and will be a factor in this. During the late fall and winter period from October 1st on till now, much of that area has received near to somewhat above normal precipitation. Heaviest amounts above normal in the southern part of the basin. You'll see that from this graphic there's actually some areas receiving below normal precipitation, and that would be over in the Red Lake drainage in northwest Minnesota, and then west of Devils Lake into the upper Cheyenne Basin in north central North Dakota. February's market warm-up was quite dramatic in affecting these flood outlooks. A near record thaw process occurred with warming from the middle part of February into the end there, which caused much of the snowpack to melt and flow out of the central and southern parts of the Red River Basin. Looking at February runoff in the larger mapping showing above normal levels throughout many of the river systems at that time, comparable to the type of flows we would have seen in 2009 and 2011. But since that time, again, a lot of that water has moved into the main stem red and up the red a bit. So we actually have seen a lowering in the overall base flows throughout most of the river systems. And of course, many of those rivers did refreeze with the very cold temperatures that we saw in early March. The frost depths have been fairly stable throughout this period, in the fact that the area showing in the circle above has largely been still covered with snow and has stayed fairly stable. That deeper area of snowpack also had many areas with some shallower frost. In the southern part of the basin, the Fargo area down toward Wyomere and Wahpeton, those early thaws basically exposed the area to actually quite deep frost, so we still have some 30 inches of frost depth down in the Fargo area. Again, the flood risks overall by category have been lowered throughout the central and southern part of the Red River Basin, much of northwest Minnesota. They have largely been unchanged up in the Pembina River Basin, and then just slight reductions now are showing up in the Park River and in the Devils Lake Basins. So we'll proceed, first of all, back up that we'll talk about what has been going on in the Cheyenne River. We'll move up the main stem red at a couple of points in there, and then primarily talk about what's going on in the upper Red River Basin and in that Devils Lake Basin. So for instance, Valley City, which sits on the Cheyenne River below Bald Hill Dam, is now only looking for minor flooding expected. There's still a significant snowpack in the upper Cheyenne River, but since the central and lower parts of that basin have removed most of their snow water, there appears to be ample room to manage that throughout the Bald Hill Dam complex. As the rivers in the South Basin come together near Fargo-Moorhead, some minor flooding is possible there, but again, it's common to get that in the Fargo area at this time of the year. We do look at flows at Fargo that have actually moved above minor flood stage earlier and have now tapered off a bit below that, waiting for the last bit of push that might come mainly through the Cheyenne River or through additional rainfall. Moving up the river quickly toward Oslo, there's really minor flooding or below minor flooding expected throughout that range. As we get up to Oslo again, minor flooding is possible there. Both in Fargo and in Oslo, you will notice that the black diamonds, which are the conditional simulations for this run, are actually now below the historical simulations. So we're actually seeing somewhat below normal risk for this time of the year for flooding. The inset does show that the Red River of the North at Oslo is starting to rise again, largely in response to, again, some of the flows coming in on the Red Lake River and just a little bit more that's coming out of the remaining snowpack in tributaries in that area. As we get into the Park River in Grafton, and this is on the northeast North Dakota side as tributaries come in there, there is a substantial snowpack yet to come in. And so we do expect major flooding to near record flooding in the Grafton area. However, we have lowered that overall risk substantially since the last outlook. We still have a 50% chance of reaching 15.6 feet, about a 20% chance of reaching the levels that were last seen in 2004 and 2013. The inset shows that the Park River in Grafton has seen now some local runoff that has been coming through there, and it is also seeing some of the releases from Hami Dam that are working on the ice that is in that river channel now. We do expect to see later this week and into next week substantial runoff start to develop into the Park River Basin. The Pembina River further north in Pembina County, not a lot of activity. The inset does show some rise from local runoff at the Pembina River at Neche. We are expecting a significant rise into the Pembina River from local runoff and from upstream flow, and we are expecting it to flatline very near 21.5 feet as it starts to break out around the town of Neche and move with overland and riverine flow around there. So again, major to near record flooding in the Neche area along the Pembina River. In northwest Minnesota, the two rivers at Hallock has been moving along steadily with releases coming now out of the Lake Bronson Dam, and with that the levels expected to fluctuate between the minor and moderate stage for quite a while here. In general, minor to moderate flooding expected at Hallock as that water moves through the system. And together now, as those Minnesota and North Dakota tributaries come together with the Red River at Pembina, moderate flooding is expected there and crossing into the border into Canada. The 50% risk of reaching 44.1 feet is substantially down from our late February and early March projections, so that's down by some 6 feet below what was earlier expected. Again, the Red River at Pembina is also showing some rises as recent melt is again coming into the Red River. Devils Lake at Creel Bay, the conditional simulation is well above the historical simulation. So the conditions right now are projected based on the very wet fall type of pattern that we've had. So with this very wet fall, virtually all of those historical scenarios shown in blue circles there are pointing to a significant runoff in rivaling the amount seen between 2009 and 2011. So again, this is a reduction in overall volume from the earlier March release, but still looking for over a 500,000 acre-feet of volume flow into the Devils Lake and Stump Lake basins. And with that, a 50% risk of reaching 1,453.4 feet. This is just, again, a touch downward from the early March projections, still looking for virtually a 3 foot, possibly 3.5 or more foot rise over the existing lake level. A 10% risk now of reaching flood of record at 1,454.3 feet. This just to show some of the timing on that. So for the Pembina River and the Park River, we'd expect to see significant runoff start to develop now at the end of this week and throughout the last week of March. And so with that, possible crests at Grafton and Neche sometime from that last part of March into the first week or so of April. But at Devils Lake, we'd expect that overland flow to develop through that time period as the snowmelt works its way toward the chain of lakes and into the basin. But the large inflow into the lake system itself will start to kick in later into April and throughout May, where we'll see rapid rises on that lake level, peaking then as we get into early to middle June. Looking at the rest of this week, there's a weather system that is going to come through and give us some sprinkles, a trace to 1/10 of an inch of rain over much of the Red River Devils Lake Basin here on Thursday into Friday. The larger low pressure system itself is actually going to pass just to the south of us for the next 7 days. Again, that larger rain pattern showing up with heavy rain, Sioux Falls area south of Minneapolis in general. But we do have another shot at a trace or 1/10 of an inch of moisture, not only late this week, but also early next week. And then for the 8 to 14 day outlook, we are expecting largely mild conditions through the end of March into early April. And then we start to get a bit wettish again, we expect, as we move into early April, but heavier rain down into the central and southern plains. And for the 30-day outlook in general, for the month of April, near normal temperatures expected with a slight wet signal persisting, and that persists throughout the April, May, June time frame. Again, a significant risk for flooding in northeast North Dakota and across the Devils Lake Basin. There we do not expect that we'll be issuing more outlooks of this nature. Most of the water will be flowing through the next couple of weeks in those river systems. So do pay attention to that. And this is Greg Gus for the National Weather Service in Grand Forks. Thank you very much.